I have seen a military coup unfolding in Thailand with all the shebangs, your friends being carried off to military barracks with hoods over their head.
What I think we see more and more in politics is that there's absolutely no trust left.
A future where everyone can see themselves prospering or, basically a future that they would like to agree on. So future retro building is a huge part of what I do. I mean, you can't have crazy politics at home. You can't have people storming the Capitol. You can't have millions of people on the street homeless. You can't have a national economy which is overdebted and tanking. I mean, he needs to fix the home base now.
Let's Dutch for cheers.
Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking. We're joined today by Marc Saxer, a German political analyst and strategist. He has spent a decade in Asia, based in Bangkok and New Delhi, in the thick of rapid transformation processes, supporting progressive actors in their struggles for a democratic and socially just order. After returning to Berlin, he's been contributing to the programmatic development of the Social Democratic Party. His work at the moment focuses on building broad societal platforms which allow social forces from and beyond the progressive... Oh God, it's too much.
And it sounds very obvious that you're reading it.
Marc, you're a busy boy. Like, German political analyst and strategist. You've been out in Asia doing all sorts, travelling around there. Now I understand you're working with the Social Democratic Party and you've just released a book. What did I miss? Please introduce yourself better than I can.
Well, first of all, hi from Berlin. I do not work for the Social Democratic Party. I help them sometimes when it comes to development of programs, but I actually work for Political Foundation. That's my job, and that job is in Asia. What I've experienced there over the last decade is part of the stuff that you may be interested, while my political analysis is a little bit different from the mainstream that you usually hear out of Berlin. I have really been in the thick of transformation, meaning I have seen a military coup unfolding in Thailand with all the shebangs, your friends being carried off to military barracks with hoods over their heads. I have seen the campaigning style in India, which sometimes is extremely violent. I have seen now the Myanmar coup, the politics of Malaysia, the war on drugs in the Philippines. So it's a rough time in Asia, and this is what I like to call transformation, very fast transformation. These are not developing countries any longer. These are countries that have already 20, 30, sometimes 40 years of rapid economic development, and now it shows that the political regimes, institutions, the system is no longer capable to accommodate that, and we see massive polarization, we see culture wars, we see violence, all these kind of things. And I believe that we are entering a similar stage here in Western countries with the next phase of transformation, and that is basically the perspective that I bring to the table.
That is an excellent introduction and a controversial opener. So to compare what's happening in Myanmar at the moment with the culture wars of Western Europe.
Well, I mean, obviously it's not one-on-one, but you would be surprised if you are actually listening to culture wars and you observe the patterns. They're not so entirely different. It is the same constellation of basically, a progressive side that wants to push for emancipation, democratic rights, democratic institutions, inclusion, the same as here. And you have a conservative camp, which is resisting that, quoting morality, quoting majority politics, very authoritarian kind of mindsets being in place and so on. So discourses may have a different cultural echo because these are Buddhist or Hindu countries and so on. But the constellation is surprisingly similar.
Very, very interesting kickoff. Thank you. I unfortunately wasn't able to read your book, Transformative Realism, because it hasn't yet been translated into English, although I understand one's coming soon. But Christian, you had a read of it. What do you think about what Mark just said and sort of your first impressions of the book? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the book. Not much we disagree on, actually, and it's like fairly straightforward, to be honest. Although I think the one part that I guess we can start this properly then with a critique of the book. And I think...
Can you maybe give a short summary of what we're talking about, as someone has not read the book?
All right, sure. Mark, do you want to describe your own book?
Yeah, it's called Transformative Realism, How to Address the Systemic Crisis. It has basically 4 parts. The first part is trying to give a brief overview. I mean, I spent a few pages on that because there are so many crises, but the point I'm trying to make is not yet another crisis book. I think there are enough of them out there. But basically really to carry home the point that these crises, financial crisis, euro crisis, refugee crisis, democracy crisis, social inequality, climate crisis, corona crisis, etc. That's what I'm talking about, the big ones, that they are all interconnected, they reinforce each other, and they basically form a new quality. We may call this an organic crisis or a systemic crisis, as I do. And basically the second part is then to say, okay, so neoliberalism failed, obviously. The emperor is without clothes, so why does the left in general not profit from that in any way? But actually the right does, right? So it's like a maneuver critique of the different strands of leftism that we see today. This may be a bit provocative, that part, but I think it's necessary because what I want to achieve with this whole thing is a strategy debate. The third part then actually introduces a new way of looking at and doing transformative politics, what I call transformative realism, which is basically to say the very reason why we are not able to shape this great transformation, why it's so messy and why we seem to be so slow, not disruptive enough in adapting our systems to the challenges out there, is the very political models, the very political governance style that we have at the moment. And I see 2 of them that don't work. One of them I call technocratic incrementalism or technocratic optimization of the system, which is still very popular in Germany. If you ask people,
as in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Yes, it's like Merkel style, Brussels style. You basically cut the big problems into little pieces. You ask the experts, you have an expert commission, and then you do, let's say, reasonable tinkering with the system in order to fix the problems, right? That's very popular in Germany, but the problem is, and there's a growing frustration, especially with the younger generations, with this style. Because if all these crises are interconnected, you cannot cut them into little pieces. You actually have to be much more courageous and fast forward than what you do. And I think in a frustration over this kind of not doing enough, not courageous enough, not disruptive enough, little politics, there is a new wave of politics on the progressive side, which I call moral activism, which basically does not have much faith in collective action anymore, does not have much faith in state action anymore, but tries to address the individual, right? It basically says, look, if you start to change your behavior, and we all do that in the sum, the society will change. And then we can tackle climate change and racism and exclusion and gender questions and so on, right?
Interesting, because that's very similar to, I would say, the spiritual movement, that the movement that's very influenced by Eastern philosophy, yoga. They're very much centered towards the individual development as well, and what the individual can contribute.
Yeah. Well, it's also what Jordan B. Peterson talks about all the time, of like, clean your own room, and if everybody does that, we're all kind of okay. And it's like, it's a very, I guess, liberal approach.
Yes.
I guess neoliberal is the word for it.
Neoliberal approach.
We don't change society, we change each person one at a time.
And that's, I think, the reason why New Age is so popular in California, no? Because it's a quintessential capitalist ideology. And I think this goes to nothing because, I mean, the point is, number one, it is embedded. All political struggles are always embedded in social struggles for hegemony. And if we observe that in Western societies, the older industrial age middle classes are not so much declining materially, but are not being respected anymore culturally. And you have a new academic, creative class emerging, then you have basically a struggle for social domination. And if you start to appeal morally to the society, and this is being perceived as talking down to people, people in a free society have the right to say no. And I think that's exactly what we see. It's like we have a lot of people who want to push climate change agenda, and we have people who actually deny climate change exists. You have a lot of people who say we need to observe the corona measures, and you have a lot of people who say corona doesn't exist, and so on, right? So they cancel each other out. So I think moral activism, because it lacks an understanding of the political economy of transformation, is also not working. So transformative realism, and that's basically the point of the book, is a reorientation, a refocus on the political economy of change, and basically thinks its entire politics out of the balance of forces in the society. So there is a very thorough analysis of who is basically the status quo and why do these people would like to preserve the status quo, and who is actually rooting for change. Disclaimer: no social group is strong enough in and by itself to change the path. Hence, the only way that you actually can do transformative politics is building broad societal alliances that can mobilize vast power resources in order to break through the resistance of the status quo alliance. So that's the whole shebang. The point is, and I guess this is why you invited me today, is that if that is true, that you need to be ready for alliance and think inside of alliance, then it is no longer possible to have an agenda that it comes only out of the fears and hopes, the values and the worldviews of the critical academic elite. Right, but you need a platform which is based on compromise and some sort of a balancing, actually. And I think that's the part that's the most controversial about the book.
I mean, there's a lot to pick apart, but can I just deep dive on how you become broad enough a church to be all things to all people, while still trying to change the status quo? Don't you become the status quo?
Yeah, you become. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's called because it's transformative, right? I think we still want the same thing. I think it's absolutely urgent that we get a handle on climate change. I think we need to master the digital economy. I think it's necessary that we emancipate the minorities that have so far been discriminated against. So the agenda is the same. The goals are the same. It's just basically the way that you get there, which is different.
Right, or the speed and the gusto with which to do that, right? Because I've heard you mention that as well, taking the risk and being very, very forward-stepping in that. Because, for example, climate change, to me, it seems like it's become quite status quo for people to want to do something about that, right? We've got the United Nations making quite strong agreements but in actual words, we're destroying the planet and we need to solve this issue. Right? We're already admitting that we're destroying the planet.
I mean, I'll put it this way, to the point where the British Conservative Party has started at least making good press releases that they might be thinking about doing something.
Right, but there's a difference between might be doing something and we need to do something right now, and it needs to be quite sweeping changes, right?
But yeah, and that's the balance, right? Your question was, how do you get a sense of urgency without being too urgent that you turn people off?
Well, I guess if you look at what we have learned in the corona crisis, is that it was probably the first time in our lives that we really had to deal with a crisis which at its core is exponential growth. Right. And what we learned is that if you wait too long with the lockdown, you're basically screwed. Right. So actually an easier lockdown earlier was the better and more effective measure than a very drastic one very late when the exponential growth already happened. And I think most of the crises have a very similar inner working. So my point is, you can be purist in your progressive agenda, but if you're not able to break through the resistance in the political economy, you will achieve nothing, right? Whereas what I'm trying to do is maybe not be as purist in the agenda, still follow the same goals, but I will want to make sure that we start earlier being disruptive, and then I think in the long run have much more measurable success.
Yeah, and if you look at some successful movements, right, they have had very clear message discipline. But over to you, Christian.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was actually one of my criticisms that I would have of the book that maybe you could get more into. But, I mean, you make the argument we should find or try to find broad social alliances, I guess is the word. But when you actually look at modern politics, this seems to be almost impossible. I mean, for example, in the recent US election, the Democratic Party won by 7 million votes or something like that, like a huge margin. And yet half of the Republican Party says it's stolen. And I think about 30% believes the whole QAnon thing, that the entire Democratic leadership is like demon-worshipping pedophiles, Satan, cannibals or something. And there's like not a small group of people. That's a huge swathe of the audience that they are trying to win over eventually. And how do you try to build an alliance if you have some people that, like, I guess, yeah, that's a good way to put it. That, yeah, we can see neoliberalism is failing quite obviously. And the left doesn't profit from it, the right does. But the really frustrating thing is that the right does profit from it while still advocating for neoliberal policies. So when we look at Donald Trump, he was advocating for neoliberalism, bar free trade. He cut down on that a tiny bit. But for anything else, he was a neoliberal.
But that's the only flavor you have, right? You have a little bit more left-wing progressive neoliberalism, and you have conservative neoliberalism. But there's no Marxism.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's your Marxism,
I know, but
right?
even like the far-right European parties, like Le Pen is basically arguing for neoliberal policies, bar we kick out all the foreigners, basically.
Sure, and even on the far Germany, left, we have neoliberal parties.
I know, but even like the AfD in Germany, they're like essentially advocating for neoliberal policies, at least to a far extent. And it seems like that how people vote and what they actually form their alliances around sometimes can seem really random. And that makes it really, really difficult to build alliances. So what seems to be the case much more effectively in building alliances is just aggressive fear-mongering. Like, for example, Donald Trump in the last election in the US, he didn't advocate any policies, he didn't advocate any coherent framework. He was just making up random things for half a year. And he still got 65 million votes, the biggest Republican result ever. Without any policies, any big project, it's kind of insane. So I guess the question is, like, when it comes to actual specific policies, how do you actually make people realize their own, like, class interests? So you specify in your book, I think, 10 different groups, something like that all have their own specific ideology and their different goals. But very many of them don't really vote according to what's best in their class interests. I think you talk about in the book as well. Instead, they vote on, like, vague culture war, random narratives that ultimately really doesn't matter. I mean, we can see it right now in the US with critical race theory. Well, I guess everywhere. It's like this small academic theory that, like, maybe 20 sociologists talk about and now blow just everywhere all over the world. And yeah, I know. And it's like, this is like an academic theory that some academics talk about to analyze society. It has, like, I'm pretty sure like all of the professors that talk about it combined make less income than Jordan B. Peterson himself. It's a small academic niche issue. It's so little, and yet it is probably going to move millions of voters in local elections. It's kind of crazy. So how do you actually overcome this, that people understand and vote on their own, well, group interests?
Okay, there was like half a dozen questions in there, Christian.
Yeah, sorry.
So
Got a bit rambly,
let me try to untangle this. First of all, I'm not talking about catch-all politics, right? I'm not talking about big tent. I'm not talking about catching all. I'm talking about broad societal alliances. Actually, someone who is associated with the Social Democratic Party of Germany, catch-all is still very much in the DNA of what we call the popular parties here in Germany. And I think in a fragmented, differentiated and plural society of 21st century, post-industrial society, that's no longer possible. And it's actually also not good politics, because what you have learned from Hillary Clinton is that having 168 different policies does not actually equate into emotionally speak to voters. Quite the contrary, Trump could without policy. So broad societal alliance is something different, right? I said the book has 4 parts, and what the 4th part does is actually try to see how you build platforms for social groups who have contravening interests, identities, and ideologies, because that is actually what needs to happen here, right? It's not only that people vote against their class interest, it's also that they have interests which are not compatible with each other. Sometimes they're believed to be in zero-sum struggles with each other, right? And that is actually, I think, the real struggle. Alliance building is not something new. I think we talk about that in the progressive camp all the time. We have several approaches how this is supposed to be done. Intersectional being the first of it. Never worked. Never seen an intersectional alliance that actually works, except getting people on the street. Because I think this alliance that is supposed to be built between academic class and minorities is not hegemonic by definition. Second, you have moves left populism is basically the idea to reorganize the white working class and the lower third of the population. Class politics, 99% against 1% sounds good on paper. Also not seen any of that working in Northern Europe.
I mean, partly because no one knows who is working class anymore, right? The goalposts have shifted so much.
Exactly, right? The working class is pluralist. The working class is female. The working class is people of color, right? So you have a very diverse working class. So you have different identities. It's makes it very, very difficult to bring them together, right? And you also have, working class, which is very well suited, especially in industrial belt of Germany, like they have a good income, they have a stable middle class life, all the way to the Deliveroo guy who brings your pizza later, which is basically precarious. But also you have precarious academics, right? So it's also in terms of material situation extremely diverse, the working class. So I think it's the wrong way to go. What I have done in the book is I've taken one of these dozens of sociological studies that are out there. I like one very much for the German society that Rita Müller-Hilmer has done. So she basically tries to come up with a typology. In the old days, you probably would have said milieus, but I don't like that word much anymore because it seems to suggest that there is a coherence between political parties and milieus, which is no longer the case, right? But I call it life worlds. And a life world is, like I said, there is a class interest, but there are also hopes and fears. There is also worldviews and values, which give them a very particular outlook on political issues. In that study, she identifies 9 of these life worlds for Germany. I'm pretty sure you also have a similar number in Britain. It's for post-industrial societies are quite similar when it comes to that.
So there's an extra one in Britain, just those people that are still hoping Jeremy Corbyn will come back.
Sure. And what I do is now to tackle like the big issues of our time, climate change, the relationship between the state, the market, and civil society, Europe, immigration and social cohesion, and digital automation, the future of work. For these 5 fields, political fields, I tried to build a platform, and I really tried to come up with both policy as well as narrative and look very distinct. I go through all of these 9 life worlds again and again and again and again. It's like, where does it resonate? Is this something that is only resonate in one of the life worlds? Forget it. Is it resonating across many life worlds? Interesting. Let's try to design it in the way that you can get as many life worlds as possible on board. That's how these platforms for the alliances is designed and built.
So isn't it
Sure. Yes.
isn't it better? Like the fear I have is if you look at the US and the UK, they're grand alliances, right? If we're talking about, let's say, the Republican Party in the US, it is a grand alliance crossing many different work classes, many different economical status, right? You have the poor people together with the rich Republicans. They're all together in one. UK is similar. It's three parties, maybe even just two if you forget the Liberal Democrats.
Could we
In
please?
Holland,
Thank you.
right? But in Holland we have like 10. In Germany it's a little bit more similar, but we have 10 different parties. And what's happened is these parties that representing different life worlds have been forming different type of alliances in different governments. And what has happened here is that the more conservative neoliberal party has become more progressive throughout the years. It's been pushed towards the left because that's the only reasonable alliances they could make to push society any bit forward. But progress is slow because you always get with the common middle ground. You always have to put a little bit of water with the wine, and it means you can't maybe progress as fast as you want. Because also I think people are easily fearful of their economic status, right? People are a little bit scared of progress and change because it might influence where you are. Even if you're poor, you might even end up worse, right? So I think that's maybe even why conservative right-wing politics has such a power these days. Because the progressive talking about how to solve climate change, it will require some grand changes, right? For example, in farming here in the Netherlands, they've been talking about reducing the animal husbandry, the livestock with 50%. But that's going to affect a lot of farmers, and these farmers are, of course, afraid of the economic impact of this and the change in their lives and the change in their social structures. Um, so this,
Okay. Maybe a few clarifications. You said that every party represents a life world. That is not the case, right? The Social Democratic Party in Germany, for instance, is not the strongest party in none of these life worlds, yet it has supporters in almost all of them. So this idea that a milieu basically is attached to a political party is not something that you can measure anymore. It's just over, right? Second, every American presidential candidate needs to build a platform for a broad societal alliances. If you want to get together 77 million people or 80 million people, you need to be able to build alliances across class, race, gender, age, and whatnot, right? And I think what we need to do is obviously build one which is not neoliberal, right? And I think that is the formula that needs to be used. And just because you mentioned climate change, I tried to show you what I mean. And this is maybe good because it's not one of my platforms, right? I'm talking about the Green New Deal. So if you look at the political field, there are right now three big approaches how to tackle the struggle against climate change. One of them is the activist one, Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, which calls for climate revolution. You can actually, map this in this political field analysis. It's all Bourdieu at the end of the day. And what you see is that it actually resonates only with this one life world, which are called the critical academic elite, right? So the urban, educated, progressive middle class. Only this. Maybe some of the mothers and fathers that bring the kids to the protests in their SUVs are also mobilized, but basically that's not even 9% of the population, right? So this is, number one, not enough. Number two, it agitates resistance on the other end of the spectrum and is not moving. Second, you have what is now rebranded as European Green Deal. I think that was just green growth in the past, which is an alliance between climate activists, technology, and financial markets, as well as the technocracy in Brussels and in the capitals. That's broader, obviously, But as you could see from the yellow vests in France, is still not transformative politics, because it does not actually take into account the losers of this transformation. And if you see, if this is anything different except greenwashing, then you look at the negotiations over the last stimulus package, where the Just Transition Fund was just scratched. Right, it was the first thing out the window. So they're still not serious about basically compensating the people who have to lose something. And the Green New Deal that I understand, which is obviously not a platform for anyone yet, is actually a deal that brings the entirety, the great mass, the center into the green transformation, right? So you compensate the losers. That's actually the important point here.
But isn't one of the problems, though, that it's just not about compensation alone? Because, for example, here they're trying to buy out the farmers, the pig farmers, and they've been offering, they've set aside billions of euros to do this. They've offered quite large sums of money. But many farmers just don't want to take it because they just want to continue their way of life, their cultural way of life.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's actually one of the 6 questions that you posed earlier, was this, why do people not follow their class interest, but, fall for these culture-war narratives and so on, right? There's a lot of basically very interesting stuff here from German sociologists. One of my favorite ones is Andreas Reckwitz. And he says that this is actually the main characteristic of what he calls Spätmoderne, late modernity, post-industrial modernity, is that the distribution conflict is wrapped within a cultural narrative, right? We discuss culture, but actually, of course, distribution is underneath, right? And I think if that's the characteristic, being a lefty, you cannot avoid it. But I think we need to be able to basically communicate our messages also that they resonate within these cultural worlds. And that's why we need to understand the political field of these life worlds so much, right? So back to your farmer, I think throwing money at the problem, I completely agree with you, is not going to solve it. What you need to do is to engage these people and offer them a better future. A future where everyone can see themselves prospering, or basically a future that they would like to agree on. So future retro building is a huge part of what I do, is basically say, if we have different interests right now, you and me, we may agree on a future that we both like, and therefore we may change a definition of our interests in terms of calculation of risk versus opportunity, so that we can actually form an alliance right now. So the utopian horizon is, for me, an absolute essential part of progressive politics. And a German, I must say, the most stupid thing that I've ever heard, the most stupid sentence of the 20th century was actually, if you have visions, you need to see an eye doctor. Right? So this skepticism against utopia is one of the things that destroy the left.
Right. It's what Rutger Bregman is really trying to point out as well, that utopia is an actual thing that we can think about and work towards. And I feel this is very much missing within left-wing
But wait,
politics.
I do have 2 questions along with that, because basically all you this explains with building different policies that speak to a broad section of society. You are kind of explaining the Jeremy Corbyn years of Labour that kind of went pretty well. But for example, in 2019, they had, I think, about 10 key policies, definitely too many. But all of their main policies were hugely popular. So there was stuff like more funding for the health service, education, just a national education service, I think, was proposed. Lots of policies that a solid majority in the UK supported, usually the 60+%. Even the least popular one was to give free broadband. So to buy the biggest broadband provider in the UK, nationalize it, and then give free broadband to old people in the countryside, essentially. Which would have been really helpful for them, especially during Corona now. These people having internet would be really helpful.
Really helpful for
crazy
rural communities.
Yeah.
Sure, but not a single country is doing this, though.
Yeah, but then we all know how 2019 went out, that the entire country didn't care about the Labour policies. Instead, they cared about Brexit and literally
Well,
nothing else.
yeah.
And that's why
The
the
Tories
Conservatives
won it with 3 words, right? Get Brexit done.
That's literally all they did. They had no policies. They're just like, we do this one thing.
One mantra.
All the policies that Labour did, they just were irrelevant. And and like, how do you actually get people to care about these sort of policies and build in lines? And I guess along with that, it's probably part of the answers. And so what I think we see more and more in politics is that there's absolutely no trust left. That, for example, if you were, let's say, for example, in Germany, if you have the leader of the Social Democrats or leader of the Green Party trying to go to like another group, let's say a slightly further right party that try to get like a standard conservative voter, very often the answer you get from these people is like, it doesn't matter what you tell us, we just don't trust you offhand. It's literally irrelevant what you promise, what policies you say. We are going to vote for this party. It's basically irrelevant what policies you make because we don't trust you. That's kind of what's come down to it. They're like this, how do you actually get people to care about policies? And how do people get to trust
well, they cared, but you said they had like 10 points which had majority, so people
but care about actual policies, not culture war bullshit.
Yeah, but people get swiped away with the culture war bullshit, right?
Yeah, like that's the problem. That
underneath it, they still care, but they get distracted.
I know, but like, let's say hypothetically, if in Germany the Social Democrats, I guess that's a party you, let's say, aligned with Marc, right? Let's say broadly.
Yes.
If they came up with like, let's say they make 10 big policies, all really popular. I guess what's like a really, like a Green New Deal that like, we are trying to out-green the Green Party. We are going to go really industrial green growth. We're going to give lots of working class voters a new green job. We are going to help them get a unionized job. We're going to give them higher wages. We make sure pensioners can get to other places easier because they have more buses, stuff like that. How many people will actually believe them?
Okay, so I was trying to listen.
Sorry, that became 10 questions again. Sorry.
10 more, fine. I was trying to listen very, 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 very carefully when you talk about policy, because I'm not sure if we talk about the same thing. I always talk about platforms, right? And a platform is a policy mix plus a narrative, which basically translates into a posture, how you approach a person, how you approach a life world, right? And I think where I'm a bit skeptical, I don't know, is that what you mean, right? But where I get very skeptical and I listen very, very closely is policy in the way that progressives usually debate this are designed to tackle problems in the way that we see fit, right? So it's from the logic of the problem, there's the policy. You have climate change, hence you need to ban fossil fuels, hence you need to ban the combustion engine, and so on, right? So that's policy, right? And what I do is a platform, which means that I have to be able to resonate with other life worlds, people other than us, academics, creative people, right? So we have to be able to reach across the aisle of life worlds. And if these policies that we deem fit do not resonate there, it's the wrong policies, even though they may be the right ones to tackle the problem, right?
Or is it just purely the narrative? Because, for example,
Brexit
was zero policy wrapped in a beautiful story that everyone bought.
No, that is
like aren't you basically just talking about marketing?
No, it's of course policy. I mean, transformation has to do with policy. We still have to ban stuff, right? We still have to finance stuff. We still have to subsidize stuff. We still have to invest in stuff. We're talking about getting things done. That's the whole point of transformative realism. So it's not just marketing, but it's the question, what kind of policy mix do you actually have to offer? And if I discuss with progressives, they're usually very convinced that they know the right kind of policies, but the right kind of policies for them. That's the problem. Who defines the agenda? That is actually a very big problem, right? The platform that I want to build is so broad that it actually caters to many life worlds, not all of them. And if it's necessary to exclude the progressives, I will.
Okay. But then it's like when we talk about the Green New Deal, I mean, we have some politicians trying it. I mean, in the US we had Bernie Sanders, we had Corbyn. In France we had Mélenchon. I think he was also Green New Deal guy, at least in spirit. All of them failed, and when you look at them, they're usually considered the far left people that can't get a big audience. So how would you restructure, how would you phrase a Green New Deal to like make it appealing beyond just the far left?
I guess what we all want is that we completely, radically, disruptively reorganize the way how we live our lives, how we produce, how we consume, how we move from point A to B, and how we do housing, right?
And how we define economic success and growth.
Whatever, all of the above has to radically change, has to become carbon neutral, right? So that's the goal. And number one, we need a narrative for that. This is going to be a better future for all of us. It's less polluted, it's less noisy, the cities is not full of cars, it will be cheaper when it comes to your energy cost, it will be more better for your health, you name it. It's a better future, a greener future for all of us. That's the narrative, right?
That's what we
So
already
how
have.
often do you hear this story? This is my problem with it. I just don't see anyone really standing up and being like enthusiastic enough about the great future that we can have ahead of us.
It's a very good point, Marian. You know what normally the communication of climate change activists is fear. Fear and panic. Fear and panic.
Negative, yeah.
Doom, bust, the planet's collapsing, climate disaster, dystopia, we're dying, no one gives a shit.
Apocalyptical self-flagellation,
Yes, exactly. It's a complete disastrous communication. What we need is, number one, a positive future that we can actually agree on that this is good for all of us, right? That's the narrative. Now the policy. The policy means that we have to step on a lot of people's foot. Right? That's why the energy transition is not working. That's why Germany has such a big problem to get out of coal. That is why it's so painfully slow. This is why the emission market doesn't really properly work, etc., etc., etc. Right? We see that there is enormous resistance in the political economy because you're actually stepping on people's foot, and these people are very, very powerful interest groups. So I need a very big leverage in order to break through here, right? And that means I have to mobilize an enormous mass of people with their discursive power, with their financial power, with their political power, with their cultural power. You need all of that in order to break through the resistance. And if I want that, I cannot have too many people who will be the losers of this transformation, right? The lower third of the population, and all of this is embedded in the entire thing. The biggest question of the next year, which will define the space for politics for the next decade, is who will pay the cost for the corona crisis, right? 1.6.
I have a prediction. It's never the rich people.
Exactly. So if it's the same as in 2008, and we make the lower third, the working class pay for it through austerity measures, number one, I think that this will be the end of democracy in Southern Europe, and it will be the end of the European Union. So it's unthinkable that we repeat this mistake, right? So that's when we just talk about austerity, but we're talking about climate change. You cannot basically make these people pay and then at the same time believe them to pay more for gasoline, more for housing, more for the heating systems, more for everything. You can't do that. It doesn't make sense, right? So the policy needs to be designed in a way that you actually compensate these people. You have to make gasoline more expensive. It has to be more expensive that you actually use energy. But then you have to compensate the losers. The same goes for the people who work in the mines. It's like if you say, and I think we need to stop coal. Stop it. No nostalgia for this shit, but you have to compensate them.
So how about the legal route, the court route? Because that's been very successful in the Netherlands. It's just simply suing the government based on pure academical logic, realism, and getting judges to actually put timelines in place and certain measures in place that governments have to follow. And here in Holland, they're doing it. Not the speed that they needed to do, Is
that a uniquely Dutch solution? I haven't heard of that.
No. In Germany, I think they've sued the government as well successfully.
Yes. Actually, Fridays for Future sued the government. They won in front of the Supreme Court. Is a epoch-making court ruling, which actually tells the government that what they've been doing is not enough. And they are basically, the justification is quite interesting if you read it, that this will impede the future freedom of future generations. That's
for the future people, for your children. Yeah,
it's a little bit problematic. It's a little bit problematic because that's the austerity narrative. No? I'm very wary of that. It's exactly the way that conservatives usually against debt and so on. So it's a little bit of a problematic, but that's not the point. The point is you're completely right. The court actually became an ally. And why not? Make the court an ally, make the media an ally. I mean, if big tech wants to be an ally, make big tech an ally. And if the financial markets want to be an ally, then it's also an ally. I mean, quite honestly, I think the exit from fossil has nothing to do with oil. It will be decided 100% the financial market. Is that if that carbon bubble thing that your Bank of England has already predicted in 2015 comes true, right? And if we look how big institutional investors and now even hedge funds actually, there's a mass exodus away from a fossil industry. At some point it will just it's no longer business, right? And so that's the end of it. Even if we have tons and tons and tons of oil and coal underneath the earth, right? So it's a financial market, and a financial market is nothing than an imagination. It's an imagination of an alternative future where there is no more point in producing fossils. And that is actually shaping the behavior of so-called rational individual in the financial markets today. That's again a retro building from the future, and that will be the end of the fossil age. It will happen in the financial markets.
I mean, sustainability is a very rational business thought in the end, right? You want your business to still
the
be there
status
in
quo
100 years.
Seems entirely irrational, but so we're so short-termism at the moment. I think I'll pick up on a bit of nuance. You said that, Extinction Rebellion turns people off. But at the same point, I understand a lot of people didn't join the protests, right? They don't wave an Extinction Rebellion flag. But it did raise the conversation. It raised the impetus. Like, it got people talking. It made it hard to ignore.
Let's put it that way. I'm not denying that there is a role for an avant-garde, right? And I think the role of the avant-garde is twofold. Number one, in terms of expertise. Of course, you need people who really put their thoughts into this and come up with the policy and the analysis and so on, right? And second, I don't know if I pronounced this correctly, but I think it's called Overton window, right? This idea that you have to push the realm of what you can say and think in public in order to make less radical policies feasible. And I think these are two very clear roles for an avant-garde activism, right? My problem with that is there is too much moral avant-garde. There's too much moral activism. I would cool it down, right? This whole lifestyle shit that's going on, don't fly an airplane, don't eat meat, stop driving a car, you're a bad person, this, you're a bad person, that Umweltsau, we call that in Germany, like a environmental pig, So you basically this whole like old wild man bullshit, that is basically looking down on people, and it's just a class culture war. That's what it is. Stop it completely, and maybe you have the attention of more people.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick you up on that because I've seen this conversation in our time as Facebook friends together, and often I think two things. One is that the right very often intentionally picks up on a straw man. Look at something stupid someone said on Twitter is not a valid criticism of a movement. And so, like, rather than that, there's a lot of people being aggressive dickheads, I actually think those are the voices that intentionally get amplified in social media companies, which profit from such noise, and traditional media, which has, if it's a slow news day, someone said something stupid on Twitter, becomes just a lazy journalist stream. Likewise, it's a theory as old as Chomsky, probably older. Often, people without much economic opportunity or political education, debating over petty small shit is all they have left. Like, I often think people who criticize the culture wars, it's like, okay, but the media never shines a light on valid opinions of economic revolution. It's easy to talk about what that footballer said and whether we should support his anti-racist protest or not. Like, I worry that it's easy to criticize someone on Twitter for saying something bad, but I think the more radical and interesting and intelligent people in a movement rarely get covered. And I don't think that's because there's a lack of them or the majority. Well, of course, there's a bunch of idiots on social media, but yeah, I just think it's too easy to criticize some people criticizing some things when really the problem is that our whole media system isn't geared towards accepting any criticism of the actual system and the things that need to change economically.
It's called transformative realism because you accept that the odds are stacked against you, right? And the whole point is that we have to build a better political machine in order to overcome this. I think there's a really fascinating book I read the other day. It was about, it was really trying to dig into this question, why, these culture wars question, why is there so much hysteria, and why is there so much, climate denial, corona denial, Querdenker, canon, conspiracy, like all this nonsense, right? So like basically like in the common conversation, people just have lost their lives, their minds, they're just idiots. And this guy, I really have to try to come up with a name right now. I'm sorry. He actually has a very interesting observation, and he says that because we have such a hegemonic grasp of the experts on policy making. And we have, because of the neoliberal paradigm of there is no alternative, right? And we just justify everything with science. People actually do not agree with that because maybe their interest is being hurt because they have to pay at the end of the day, or their freedom is being curtailed, or they maybe just look down upon. I don't know what their reasons are, but they have learned that you have to attack the science because the justification for policy is science. So they attack the science. So all of these conspiracy theories and this, just denial stuff is basically, in that sense, a culture class war.
But even that it's very amplified. Honestly, I don't know how it is in Germany, but you hear a lot about it here as well, and it's much less than 10% of any voting.
Yes.
Voting public. So we're not talking about the majority here that's actually setting policy by voting for certain parties.
In Germany, only 8% of the population is on Twitter. So,
Right.
It's just a very small echo chamber, no?
Yeah,
Right.
and there's a very common phenomenon of journalists having no idea what's going on in the real world and thinking that that tweet storm would be the death of a politician, and the average person is like, what?
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about the Green New Deal again, because this is one of but I would say it's a criticism of your book, that I would have liked for you to go into more specific detail. So, for example, when you talked about early Green New Deal, it has to be more, we help the working class get jobs. We want better jobs, more paying jobs, unionized jobs, all of that. That is literally Bernie Sanders. That's what Bernie Sanders tried in last year, the US election. And he got 30% of the Democratic vote. He lost really hard to Joe Biden. Advocating for exactly
he
that
was
policy.
doing very well until everyone allied against him, which was a good
But
alliance.
It was, I know, but when you look at the polls, Joe Biden was basically among the Democrats the most popular one, and Bernie Sanders was the least popular alternative. Of all the people, if they started with Pete Buttigieg or Klobuchar,
There's so much
Bernie
more
Sanders was
involved
always
here,
the
though.
least popular alternative, and Joe Biden was just more popular, easily won that vote. What could Bernie Sanders have done differently to actually win the nomination of the Democratic
Appeal
Party.
to the older demographics, basically, because I think...
Yeah, but how do you appeal to all the demographics? That's really hard. Like, that's what social democratic parties right now try to figure out. That, for example, in 2019, Labour won among all social groups except retired people. And among retired people, the Tories won by, like, massive margins. But for any younger generation, like anybody under 50, basically majority Labour. Only once you get older, then the old people massively skew towards conservatives. So how for like a Bernie Sanders type person that advocates for here is a Green New Deal, here's the thing that gets more jobs, that gets better jobs, that gets cleaner cities, easier reachability, all of that stuff. What could they do differently to actually attract more people? Or like to sell it to old people, I guess is another phrase.
Can I ask you guys a quick question? Is my personal opinion poll. Would the three of you, yes or no, agree that there is an organic systemic crisis?
Sure, yes.
What do you mean by that?
Don't even have to go into detail. Like, is your first reaction yes or no?
I mean, our politics is really badly broken, if that's your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my observation is, and I've talked to, I mean, at this point, probably more than 200 people, right, with the book. If you have a person over 60, there is a hardcore denial that something's broken. Hardcore.
The definition
Emotional.
of conservatism is let's not change things.
No.
Right?
We're talking about also
More than
progressives.
conservatism.
We're also
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
progressives, right?
Yeah.
Like if that
Very
person is
well, yeah.
over 60, at least in West Germany, they do not accept that this is not just, bad luck and a couple of crises that you can fix, but it's
No, so
actually coming together. And
It's
if I
the
have
nuclear threat that they had.
Yeah,
Because
you-
if I look at my father, his argument is always, well, we were afraid of the bomb in the 60s and the 70s.
You think they
and
just got
nothing
their
really
adrenal
happened.
glands burnt out?
And
They're like,
well, you always think that the world's gonna end. No, for real, the world's gonna end.
Yeah.
But no, we had the bomb. and-
the boy cried wolf too many times for them. They've given up caring.
yeah, exactly.
Wait, but
Yeah.
Mark, really quick question. I guess you're from West Germany, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I grew up in East Germany after the 90s. And basically among all the old people I knew back then, they're all very much disagreeing that, like, for them politics was massively broken.
Yes.
And I guess there's like a massive difference in Germany, that like
Right.
the East has a very different outlook.
I had
Yeah, I saw it. I
a
remember,
discussion in Saxony, so I agree with that, yes.
Yeah, no, I remember I grew up in, the state is called Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. I have no idea how to say it in English. It's a really poor one in the northeast where basically nobody cares about.
Well, it hasn't
It's
been
kinda like-
translated, so that tells you something
Yeah, it's
about
like
it.
literally, it's like 1 million farmers somewhere that nobody cares about, a couple of tourists. In there, nowadays the far-right party in Germany is called the AfD. But before that, there was the super far-right party called the NPD, the National Democratic Party, basically the Nazi party. And those guys in that state, before they were absorbed by the AfD, got like a solid 8 to 10% on the parliament, basically every election cycle. Because you had a huge amount of people that just hated all mainstream parties. And I grew up in the capital of that state. But if you, during election time, drove further out to the villages a bit further east, basically the only party that would advertise there was the super far-right party. Any mainstream party, they basically gave up. And then in these villages, in some where you only have like a few hundred people living, you got like solidly 70% for the Nazi party. And it was kind of like a precursor to like what's swept all over the world now. That we have more people being just abandoned to an extent, and they just go for like the super far right or stop voting entirely. So I mean, you can see it for like the German Social Democrats. They used to command 40% of the vote, a bit less, bit more around that time. And nowadays they had 15% because they lost a huge amount of their constituency. And where was I going with that? But yeah, it's like this. How to capture them again is really, really difficult. And like for them to even propose policies that this constituency that they lost would actually believe is really hard. And there's just this huge group of people that just thinks politics is so inherently broken that you can't believe any mainstream group anymore.
And then you start talking about climate change and the fact that they as farmers need to quit farming, they as coal miners need to stop coal mining.
Actually,
they're usually the most affected group when we're talking about climate
let's say
change.
Now
right?
the Social Democratic Party starts talking about, we're going to start a Green New Deal, we're going to invest massively, we're going to create, 10 million new green jobs for all the people that lost their mining jobs, now have to work in a call center and their life sucks. We're going to give all of them a more respectable job. How many would actually believe that slogan, that life could get better? I feel like our trust in politics is so fundamentally broken that talking about great utopias or even even general improvement is very
pretty cynical. Most political campaigns for
the
the last 8 years have been
it's very cynical.
That person's positivity is bullshit.
Yeah, but
think about it. Think about how many elections have been, that guy's talking positive, don't trust it.
Very true. Yeah.
Let me pick up on that. So I think your original question was, why did Bernie Sanders not win, right? And
right. Good question.
What I wanted to go with my little opinion poll, and you're completely right, it's different in East Germany, and the reasons you have basically cited. But the point is that in West Germany, I think in many parts of Western Europe is the same. You do not have to explain that to a younger person. It's just a given that the crisis is systemic. For the older generation, this is a thought they're not willing to accept. This is very emotional. You get very emotional rejections. The system is not broken, the system is working, right? So that means, because most voters are old, and actually most people that actually vote are old, that you have status quo politics. And that means that our politics over the last 30 years has not been transformative, but system optimization. That's a technocratic incrementalism that I've been citing in the beginning. So if you are living in Eastern Germany and you see that this neoliberal model is actually screwing you, and that politics is actually not good for anything because the state does basically nothing, of course you will be cynical. Because when you're at the receiving end, you have been seeing two things. Number one, the jobs have gone overseas. You've been deindustrialized. Second, neoliberal policy has told you, in Germany called that Ich AG. So basically, the entire risk of life, health, unemployment is on you now. You're on your own. And number three, austerity.
About the Uber driver.
Yes.
Sorry. In the UK, it's Uber driver, basically.
Number three means that we have, in Germany, called that Daseinsvorsorge. I would probably translate that as public services like trains and health centers and the basic stuff that if you asked your grandmother, she would say that's the state. She wouldn't think about all this abstract stuff, but the state is basically, we've seen that in the COVID crisis, it's not really good anymore, and the train is not going to the small villages anymore. We don't have internet, and if I want to have my baby is being born, I have to travel 200 kilometers in order to find a midwife, and so on and so on and so on. So basically, these people have experience in their own life, or in West Germany are afraid that they will, that these autonomous things like globalization, migration, automation is really bad for them. And they have learned that the political approach of the last 2 decades was screw you, we don't care, you don't matter, right? And this is where the anger is from. So transformative politics means that we actually have to change the paradigm again. I'm not talking about some new communication for the same politics. I'm actually talking about real different politics. So that means I want to have, you asked the question earlier, is like, okay, you don't talk much about the Green New Deal. The reason is because the Green New Deal is not my platform. It existed earlier. I just wanted to have it in the book because I think climate change is so actually important. But that's why I only wrote like 3 pages on it. But I actually did some platforms on my own. And one of that is the Garden State. The Gardener state is actually bringing back neo-Keynesian politics, is actually bringing an investing state, is actually bringing capacity for the state, especially on the communal level. In Germany, actually, in the Corona crisis, we learned that we spent billions and billions in euros, but it had no or little economic effect because the communes are so bankrupt and they have no personnel, right? So they can't take the money and do anything with it. So the capacity of the state after 30 years of austerity is a skeleton, right? And then the neoliberals have the chutzpah to say, look, the state is not doing well, right? But because you destroyed it. So we need to actually rebuild a capable, investing, world-class public service into the regions, into the provinces, into the Rust Belt. Bring that back. I think that would be something that people actually feel makes a real difference in their life. And that is one of the paradigm shifts that I propose. But that will be fought tooth and nail by the Status Quo Alliance. Tooth and nail. This is the black zero in Germany. This is about we don't want debt. We don't want, the freedom of our children, all this nonsense. Right? It's like they will fight this with everything they have.
Yeah. It's actually, along with that, to support that statement, there's a really cool book in the US written by Robert Putnam. It's called Bowling Alone.
Yes.
It's quite famous. Not sure if you guys know it, but have you read it?
Book. It's a fantastic book, and it's exactly what I'm talking about.
I know. But basically what he talks about is that between the 1970s to 2000, roughly in that time range, basically in the US, the social society kind of collapsed. And he has a ton of graphs on different aspects. It starts with something like membership in a party, like actually being part of a party, just went down by half. Union membership collapsed, social organization like churches or social club collapsed. But it goes much further. It also goes that people don't write to their newspaper as much anymore. This went down by like 60%. People have fewer friends, people do less social stuff. And all of that, basically all of these things collapsed by basically half, which is kind of insane. And I think this is one of the major issues of our time, that, let's say, 50, 60 years ago, in like the 50s or 60s, a bit later, there was quite a few different social organizations that organized society among more collective lines, so that you were part of a union or a church. You always talk to other people of different classes, different opinions.
This is what I said about
it was much easier to get people organized.
The redefinition of the working class. Who's in a union these days?
Far fewer people.
If you're an office temp worker,
I know,
what's
but
your
it's
union
not just
status?
the unions. I don't know, but the unions are a big part, but it's much more than that. Like the entire, society isn't as engaged in politics as it used to be, or like in society as a whole. It's
by the way,
strange.
A little bit of positivity. Having joined a local political party, I found it a really interesting social group of people, passionate about making the world a better place, possibly optimistic, possibly naive, but I have never met such lovely people since I've joined a local political party. And I would recommend it to anyone. I bet I was skeptical. I was cynical. I've really enjoyed it. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, sure. But rebuilding all of that seems like this insanely monumental task that I wouldn't even know where to start. Because you have to rebuild the union movement, rebuild independent local newspapers, rebuild local churches, rebuild local anything.
And how do you build these alliances? Basically disappeared. How do you build all these alliances when there's an election every 4 years?
So there is a technocratic solution to this, though. There is. And in the Netherlands, they are trying this with more communal building for communal style living. Yes. So shared spaces, shared garden spaces. There are technocratic solutions.
But you were skeptical as fuck of that, Meringue. We were talking about how there's just these people that just end up kind of hippie hipsters growing plants and ignoring the outside world, right?
Yeah, but that's what we're doing here in Europe anyway. Like we build our fort and screw the rest of the world. I mean, we're talking about the bill of the corona. It's not in Europe, the bill. The bill's being paid outside of Europe. We've got our, Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, and screw the rest. So
clearly not. This healthcare crisis is universal. We need to. It won't be over until everyone's vaccinated.
Can pick up.
But I guess back to a proper question, how could we rebuild all of that? What can we?
Yeah, Mark, you've got 20 minutes. Fix it all. Go.
Yeah, fix the world, please.
If I just gobble up the stuff that you throw into the mix right now, there is a couple of very important ones, and that's my third platform. Really hard to translate. Maybe you help me, Christian. It's called Lebenswerte Heimaten. So it's like livable communities or something like that. It doesn't really make sense in English.
Community pride?
something like that.
Community ownership or citizenship.
Let me explain what it means. So the platform is actually a mix of three things. Number one, I already mentioned it, bring back public services to the communes out there where they have been cut back. So that's the material dimension. In order to basically, Amartya Sen here, give people the capabilities to live their life to the fullest, right? Number two, I think you mentioned democracy, local democracy. I think it's immensely important. This is where you actually have something to say that makes a difference in the world that you live in, your life world. And you can actually talk to real people that you know and make decisions together. I think it's an extremely empowerment.
Everyone wants to waste a year trying to tackle the biggest problem in the world that requires 7 billion people to cooperate.
Right.
So just try and fix your back garden. Tidy your room, as Jordan Peterson would say.
Another word that I find very difficult to translate, Christian, help me, it's like Selbstwirksamkeit. It's like the feeling that you actually feel that you're actually moving something in the world, that you have an impact, agency, right? And that is very important, because
I guess individual political agency is like the one phrase.
Yeah, but also the feeling of that. It's a psychological thing.
Making a difference. And then the rush of endorphins you feel when you...
Yeah, making a difference, I guess, is a good...
Yeah, so this whole cynicism is very much connected to a feeling of powerlessness, to impotence, right? Because, like you said, 7 billion people, who am I, to make a difference? It doesn't matter anyway. So that's the prevailing feeling. So I think that the second dimension of the Lebenswerte Heimaten is local politics, where you actually can make a difference. And the third one is that, people are lost, because these transformations are very, very fast, right? And they're looking for roots, they're looking for a place to belong, they're looking for an identity, and they're looking something to be proud of, right? And I think what we need to bring into the mix is something like local traditions. I'm sure that's very, very similar in England. The little units, if it's maybe East London or if it's, that village, the county where you live, you have local traditions, you have rituals, you have a certain dialect.
It's been lost a bit, as you say, bowling alone with all the migration of everyone.
Bring that back. I'm saying bring that back and have a positive attitude towards that from a progressive side, because normally like in Germany, it's like, oh my God, it's patriotism, it's evil, and Heimat is also evil, all this nonsense. It's very important because if people feel lost, you will have exactly this kind of culture war rhetoric because they feel threatened in their identity and lifestyles, and that's not what we want, because that is not something. If you're afraid now that you lose everything, you will not come with me in a journey to build a better future, right? So we need to make sure that people actually have 2 feet on the ground and some solid ground to stand on, materially, democratically, as well as culturally, and then actually maybe we can start to talk to them about something more solid again. And I think that's very important, especially in a society that has become ever more fragmented, ever more pluralist, ever more differentiated. The society becomes more colorful, right? So we make sure that we invest in these kind of communal resources. That I think is the second very important platform.
Oh wait, I have one point to add. Actually. And that's actually what I feel is missing in or could be a good addition to your book, and that's media. I don't think you talk too much about it. But yeah, basically what we see nowadays.
I don't have a TV, so.
That's probably healthy.
Yes, it is. But I have social media, that's not healthy.
I'm the same. I got rid of my TV, I'm like, brilliant. And then I spend all my time arguing with strangers on Facebook.
Yeah, but the thing is that, let's say when we had 50 years ago, pretty much every small town, every small community had their own local newspaper, locally owned, local writers, all of that stuff. All of that basically went away. Nowadays we have a couple of TV stations that are local, but they're usually owned by some big conglomerate. And then most people get their news from like giant newspapers that like have reach of millions.
Really? Because I think a lot of
these
people
are owned by billionaires.
Are you sure? Because I think a lot of people get information from the internet, which is everyone is a journalist now, and everyone has an opinion.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And everyone is writing about it.
That's partly even worse.
It's very local.
No, it's not. Like what people
it's
listen
global
to,
and local.
Like the No, they don't listen to like their local like neighbor or something. They listen to like one guy who got really big on Facebook, like a Tim Pool or an Alex Jones, for example. These are where the actual big audiences are. And you have like, I mean, in there, the actual platform is something like Google or Facebook or Amazon, I suppose, and they have an insane amount of power. And what you effectively have is that our entire information environment is dictated by a couple of really rich people with their own agenda.
Can you give me a glass of wine?
And yeah, as a consequence,
You're drinking. I'm not. It's not fair.
So
At
apologies.
the same time, there are also
But yeah, I
local,
think that's one
local
of the
groups
major
on Facebook,
problems.
though.
yeah, but they're tiny. Like a local group on Facebook.
But they have
Christian,
Then you have, like,
Mark,
a real world
so
value.
nearly said something positive, and you just had to make it negative again.
No, I think it's very easy to fix, actually. Like something like breaking up Facebook or Google, or making sure that newspapers can't like own a giant, like something like Rupert Murdoch.
So
You have, like, one guy owning 20 newspapers.
I've noticed it
If you
personally.
make this illegal and like encourage more local newspapers, like more small news outlets,
I've got
it would have
involved
a huge
with.
impact.
I moved to a small city, Plymouth, in the southwest of England, right? And I was listening to the radio, and there's no local radio station. And I noticed that all the 3 radio stations were bought by, I believe it's a German company, a big conglomerate, and. And it's just, obviously much cheaper for them to buy every local radio station across the country and pump out the same greatest hits love songs of the 90s. So I got involved in the community radio station.
But it's not only communities. I mean, let's pick up on what Christian was going for. It's not only media. I mean, it's a platform economy at the end of the day, and we have enormous concentrations of power. I mean, we basically have the same concentration of wealth and power like the Gilded Age with the robber barons, right? Imagine that. Both when it comes
It's
to
even worse by now, actually.
yes,
because
So,
the technology is so comparatively as new, right?
I don't think it has much to do with the
that's not the
technology.
reason.
It's the political economy
politics.
of this, And then we go back to my original point. The starting point is that all politics operate within societal balance of forces, and they have to try to change them, right? So if you are attacking now the main fort, and that's actually what you're proposing, I very much agree, to break them up, right? But where is your strength? Where is your power? Where are your power resources? How do you do that?
I have a
right?
big Facebook group, which I'm going to use to bring down Facebook.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
breaking up Facebook and Google is actually like pretty broad consensus. Like in the US, the Republicans hate all the big like tech monopolies.
Well, yeah, that's the
They
thing.
get kicked
So
out by them because they're all Nazis.
they spent
Well,
eight,
actually,
they spent 8
quite a
years
good number.
courting
This could
them,
actually
right?
happen.
Yeah.
Well, there
And
are
then
actually
everyone
right now
understands.
5 bills in Congress that try to do just that. Right? I mean, they will not go anywhere, but they are in Congress right now, so we're not that far away from that, right? But that would mean that you need to be able to build a bipartisan consensus, and you need a government willing to act on that agenda, which means that this has to be the hegemonic discourse that these big, shiny, beautiful companies that we are so proud and we have made fat and fatter over the last 2 decades are actually bad because it's a monopoly. And interestingly enough, the liberals understand that better than the left, right? I think, for instance, my garden estate is monopoly busting, but very much so. I think it's an absolute thing that we have forgotten is like bust monopolies. And there you have your broad alliance. A lot of liberals would love to do that.
I mean, lots of left wing as well.
Oh, and now the right as well, because they censored Trump, right? So they're no longer supportive of Facebook, Twitter.
I mean, I don't.
Like I said
don't really-
earlier, I don't care who's in the alliance as long as we get it done, right?
Fair? Yeah.
But I think their policy is mostly that force Facebook and Google to show the results, not break them up. I think that's most of their laws.
Well, this is 2021. I mean, I don't know where we're going with this.
That's the
The
start,
point
though,
is-
right?
yeah.
First transparency, then use that as a club to beat them with. Oh, it's coming. A reckoning's coming for the big tech. I think just like, the robber barons of the railroad tycoon age. We've built cars without seatbelts. It's very obvious from social media that there's a lot
I
is
don't
wrong
know.
with
I
it,
mean-
and the wheels are coming off.
I am 47 years old. And I have in my time not once seen transformative politics since I am socialized into politics, right? So forgive me that even I'm very cynical towards big plans, and big rhetoric, because normally you already know nothing will happen. And I think that needs to change, that we actually have to make it happen. And when you're like me working also within the political apparatus, I know that a lot of people who have the heart in the right place, they have some sort of a self-censorship in their head. It's like you propose something. For instance, we wanted to nationalize the big housing companies in Berlin, right? And the immediate answer would be, oh, you can't do that because of the Supreme Court. You can't do that because of the CDU. You can't do that because the faction is not going to cooperate. You can't do that because of the media. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. So it's like a self-censorship that you do in your own head, right?
And I find it fascinating. Since joining the local Labour Party, every single person I've spoken to privately has said, "Don't tell anyone, but I think this." Yes. And they all agree. But
I like Corbyn. Don't tell anyone.
No, they've all said the same thing to me. I'm left of Corbyn, actually, but we have to move forwards and build a coalition. Da, 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 da. It's amazing to me. They've all said the same thing. Don't tell any of the other party members, but I'm left of Corbyn. I didn't disagree with any of his policies.
But I mean, we can see during a crisis that things can move really fast. I mean, in 2008, Obama nationalized most big banks and...
like within weeks,
the two big, like Ford and what's the other big car maker? They were just all nationalized for a short while, and that's kind of insane that all the big U.S. car makers could be U.S. owned, or like owned by the U.S. government, and
temporarily and sold at a loss.
Yeah, I know, but they could have just kept them and like put them into like a giant cooperative or something. Would have been doable. And if they had wanted to.
Well, I mean, I believe in markets, and I think nationalization is also not really the way to go. The point is that you have to break them up, so you still have a competitive market. But there is another platform, and we're touching upon it. This is what I call the human economy, right? And that's the platform for me in order to tackle and shape the digital automation. I'm not a big fan of this, work's going to run out, the machines are going to take all over the jobs and there's nothing left for us. I think historically that's not, you don't see that this is valid, right? But you do know from previous, industrial revolutions that there is enormous distortions in the labor market and a lot of people will probably get hurt, right? So what I propose with the human economy in terms of policy is that we actually introduce a second labor market, which I call a solidarity labor market, which introduces some sort of basic income for people who contribute to the community. It's not a universal basic income, and I explain to you in 1 second why, but it's a solidarity basic income that actually says, if you're raising kids, if you take care of the elderly, if you're producing art, if you preserve local cultural heritage, if you're protecting
picking up litter in your local park,
whatever you do,
a social credit system, basically.
Yes, without the Chinese supervisionary state, right? But basically, it's a Keynesian idea. Like economics is very simple. You have to create demand, so put money in people's pockets, right? The reason why it's not a universal basic income proposal, again, has to do with these broad societal alliances that are built, because I done with an in-depth discourse analysis of basic income. And it's quite interesting is that there are people in favor of it. A lot of them are the Davos billionaires, right? And if you listen to the trade unions and a lot of working class people, they are against it. And there is, of course, the fear it's a Trojan horse, right? That this is only being introduced in order to take away the welfare state and then later reduce it. And second, it is this very strong pride of work. It's a work ethic. A lot of workers believe that if I work, I must get more than someone who does not work. Right? It's an ethical thing.
Yeah,
right?
and we talked earlier about, you can pay people not to work, but there's not a lot of warmth for that. Yeah.
But it's a good example how this platform building works, because they're in the progressive camp right now is a lot of proponents of universal basic income, right?
I've had some big debates with leftist YouTubers who think that no one should have to work in Tesco's and everyone should be able to play on YouTube all day.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yes, but
might get us there.
I don't think it's something that is brought in even in the progressive camp.
I don't think it's even something that's positive. Like, I don't think we should all be stuck in a flat, given our basic nutritional needs.
Yes, right.
Through a pipe.
But I just cite that because I think it's an interesting example, because you've been asking me a couple of times, how do you build these alliances, right? And it's a good example where we have a progressive idea, right? I'm not sure if it's progressive, but a lot of progressives are actually proposing it. And I think it's the wrong platform. UBI is the wrong platform, right? You will not even be able to mobilize large parts of the trade union and working class. And that's what I mean, that you have to build the platform so the life worlds can come together, and not what, someone has figured out by him or herself what is the best solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, UBI amazes me because there's so much work to be done, right?
But no, sorry, different thing.
Sure.
I mean, that was again. Then we come back to Bernie Sanders, because he didn't advocate for universal basic income. He said better social services, like better healthcare, better unemployment money, better all of that. Like, again, what could he have done differently to capture the old people? Sorry, my camera is
so good.
Overheating. It needs like a second.
You're just too hot, Christian.
No, my room is indeed very hot. The sun shines straight into it.
So a very British problem, of course, for the 2 weeks of summer that we have.
Yeah, sure. But I guess, more specifically, like, what could Bernie Sanders done differently to win the election? Like, how could he have changed his policy or his whole platform?
It's difficult to say, actually. I think it was really close for a second, and then maybe it was a tactical defeat. I think the Sanders platform was much more broad than, for instance, Corbyn's platform. I think Corbyn, I don't know, you guys read it, you have much better understanding of British politics than me. But I think I would say, if the society wants to talk about culture and you talk about healthcare, you're not going to win that, right? And that has a lot to do with hegemony. If you're not hegemonic, you cannot change the conversation. And that is an important thing. In the US, it's difficult to say, because I think Bernie Sanders' platform was much broader, and he was actually very strongly alliance building. I mean, in 2016, remember, there was some quarrels between Black Lives Matter and the then Sanders campaign.
Yep.
And I think these things have actually been brought together.
Yes, he actually
quite
tied
seamlessly.
quite closely with the African American community.
Right.
That support. I mean, partly because he's got the history of having marched with Martin Luther King, and
yet they voted for Biden, no?
Well, I don't think they voted. I think the Democratic
Would
establishment,
he have won?
as you say, strategically teamed up. And I think you're absolutely right. Corbyn was strategic, right? Like, I think that's an absolutely fair comparison. I think Bernie gave his best shot. He was against the entire machinations of the Democratic National Party, if you want my assessment. Would rather lose than Bernie win. Because
plus the craziest candidate ever, like Trump. He was going against Trump.
And again, though, don't underestimate the power of a 3-word like Trump and get Brexit done. Really summarize how effective.
I think the US one is Orange Man Bad.
Yeah,
get Trump out. That was the election. Get Trump out,
and that worked for Biden.
Not necessarily progressive
that
election.
Worked for Biden. A soundbite that everyone could get behind.
Still, I mean, I admit that I was not in the Biden camp, but I must say I don't know how you read it. I'm quite positively surprised about a couple of things that he's been doing.
Yeah, I'm surprised how much people hate him. I don't think he's been evil yet.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, he got universal child benefits. That's kind of insane, actually.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically has resuscitated Keynesian politics, right? And I mean, if this becomes not only a crisis fighting mode, but actually becomes the new economic paradigm in the US. And, you listen in Germany, for instance, the mighty German Federation of Industries has said to the CDU that they don't want any more austerity anymore.
Yeah.
Surprising.
I know.
Very surprising.
I do think the Green New Deal will happen and something will happen. My only concern with Biden right now is the Chinese hawks, because that's always the how do they pay for it? And I think that's the political games they play, is like, we can get this deal done, we can get this deal done. We need a war somewhere. That's how the Democrats always pay for it. Just a theory. The political capital, the political horse trading. There will be a war somewhere. Mark my words.
I was not smashed with Biden's campaign, but I'm just saying, I think he's doing a lot of things right now that I find surprisingly progressive. Actually, by the way, he is not freezing
and
out
impressively
Bernie.
Effective, as you say, coalition building to convince German industry to embrace the Green New Deal would be a very
that
impressive
I think
coup.
has more to do with self-interest of German industry, but it's quite remarkable. So I think, I mean, for instance, the Merkel-Macron plan, which was basically brokered by the Social Democratic candidate who is now the Minister of Finance. This has been prepared for 2 years by winning discourse hegemony in the national economy, academia class. I don't know how you call that properly, right? So like in German, national economics was like monetarist in a very vulgar way, ordoliberal, and basically austerity minded. That was the old Schäuble. But Schäuble was talking. There was a near consensus. The German media,
Schäuble
German
is the
academia.
German finance minister back then.
Right. Well, I think he's infamous enough that we all remember him. Really, I mean, he destroyed Greece.
No, I mean
himself.
for the non-Germans. Do you know Schäuble?
I remember the story of Greece. I don't think the name has brand recognition as much.
All right. Okay. Anyway,
so he's not that famous, but yeah.
The point is that all of these things are changing at the same time. The industry has a new approach. Academia has a new approach. Vast parts of the political party system is coming around, and at the end of the day, even Merkel had to budge. I mean, just to be very sure, in Germany, you had two political catastrophes for the political popular parties. It was the split of the left party from the SPD, right, over agenda politics, and it was the split of the AfD from the CDU over Greece and the possible introduction of debt at the European level, right? So Merkel has been, absolutely super careful not to repeat that, and yet she had to do it. So I think, for me, a political paradigm change becomes credible if you have to actually put your skin into it, if you actually have to pay a price. And she had to pay a price for that. And I think that's why it's to be taken seriously. And I think if you add Biden to that mix, I do believe we do see a paradigm shift when it comes to economic development policy.
So do you reject Yanis Varoufakis' statement that when he was negotiating, no one had any choices, and he was surprised to be talking to, the German finance minister, and discover that even that person couldn't have said, "Okay, you know what? You've convinced me. We're going to wave the debt off." Like, he was just surprised how there were no actual levers, and how all these people in power, despite all the optimism we've said, end up just having to make the decision, which is why they got the job in the first place. They just know what the right decision for their organization, for the status quo, for the power unit, for the 1% is.
Well, this is 100% exactly what I'm talking about in the book. It was the perfect hegemony of the status quo, right? And no politician as powerful as they possibly come could have changed that. And I think that's exactly what Yanis has experienced. But my point is that this hegemony is shifting now on a very broad level. And there are reasons for that. I think the most important, there is actually a couple of reasons, but I think one of the most important ones has nothing to do with all the stuff that we're talking about. It actually has to do with geopolitics. If you see what the rise of China is really doing in the global world economy, you will see basically two big shifts. One of them is away from efficiency, just in time, towards resilience, just in case, right? Which means that you're going to reorganize the supply chains. That is something that you want to do for geopolitical reasons, because you have too many eggs in the Chinese basket, but you also want to do it after COVID because we saw how fragile these things are. Second, you see that free trade is over, and there is an emergence of economic blocks. And if you want to get into these blocks, like the RCEP in Asia or the Chinese market in a more narrow sense, you have to pay a political entry ticket, right? So that means this whole idea of export economy, what Germany was basically driving for the last 70 years, is in very dire straits, if not coming to an end. I really say that 2008 was peak globalization. Not in the sense that we're going back to some sort of national economy or nonsense like that, but you're going to see a regionalization of the global economy, and you see an attack on the European market. So the reason why the German industry suddenly suddenly found it's hard for Italy, Spain, and Greece is that because we need the domestic market, and if these guys collapse, it's game over, right? So suddenly debt again is the only solution. The Dutch will come around eventually as well. I mean, they're still like a little bit in their austerity thing, but it was fascinating. Now, I didn't say something. It was the most fascinating thing, the frugal four against the Germans. I mean, that was like, I've never seen this constellation. It's like austerity, 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 never debt, never debt, never debt. That was the hegemony for a long time.
Well,
and suddenly,
hegemony implies monopoly, but China was still lending money to everyone, right?
Well, which is a geopolitical problem, right? If China starts lending to Greece and Hungary and starts building infrastructure projects, you have a problem. You have an intruder in your own realm of influence, no?
Yeah, as we've already seen.
So suddenly there is a shift, and it's not because you found your benign heart, but because there is a shift in the geopolitics, and that will change a lot. That's also, by the way, why Biden has to fix the domestic politics of the US. I mean, if you want to have a hegemonic struggle with the new competitor over world dominance, I mean, you can't have crazy politics at home. You can't have people storming the Capitol. You can't have millions of people on the street homeless. You can't have a national economy which is overdebted and tanking. I mean, he needs to fix the home base now. So suddenly we're spending money. And again, I don't give a shit why we're doing it. I'm happy we're doing it.
Yeah, that's the big thing I've said is that like people are angry that the Conservative Party is starting to end austerity and invest. And I'm like, but wasn't that what we wanted? Like, I get it. You're so party loyal that you want your side doing it. But I'm like, but
I guess the important part is where they invest the money. I mean, Trump was actually really big
they
spender.
invest the money in towns that switch from Labour to Conservative.
Yeah,
They're
I know.
pretty clear on that.
Yeah. But this is what you see all the time, that Republicans spend actually a ton of money. Like both Bush and Trump just spend crazy amounts, except that they spend on like plus
tax breaks,
tax cuts and military.
Yeah, tax cuts and military, and they do spend a huge amount of money. And it's more like, I guess the spending should be more on like general healthcare, for example.
All right.
But
Mark, that was fascinating. I was not expecting it to be that fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I also had a lot of fun. I mean, you guys are really giving me a run for the money here.
Yeah, with our eight sub-point tangents, you did really well.
All right, thank you guys, and I'm looking forward for this to be out.
Yeah, I think you've earned your wine, so please enjoy it. If you could,
thank you
please
very much.
Send us a link to your book when it comes out in English. We will update it in the show notes. Because yes, this has been a very interesting and much needed conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
James.
night.
Take care. Have a good evening.